A diet followed by millions of people may carry a hidden cardiovascular risk nobody expected. Researchers recently reported a startling link between fasting schedules and heart disease deaths. This was not a rumor or a poorly designed internet claim spreading online. It came from a major scientific conference where cardiologists study population health trends. The finding centers on a popular eating style called time-restricted eating. Millions of people now compress their meals into a short daily window. Many simply call this approach the 16-8 method of intermittent fasting. Eat for 8 hours, then fast for the remaining 16 hours daily. Celebrities, fitness influencers, and everyday dieters have embraced this pattern for years. It promised weight loss, better focus, and simpler control over daily eating habits. Then researchers from Shanghai Jiaotong University presented findings that challenged that promise. Their analysis suggested this popular fasting method might carry a serious hidden cost. The team examined health data from more than 20,000 American adults. That data came from a long-running national nutrition and health survey. Participants reported their typical eating patterns across multiple detailed dietary recall interviews. Researchers then tracked which participants died and from what specific causes. People who ate within an 8-hour window stood out in the results. The risk of dying from cardiovascular disease was dramatically higher than expected. Compared with people eating across 12 to 16 hours, the difference was striking. Those following the shortest eating windows had a 91% higher risk. That number essentially means their cardiovascular death risk had almost doubled overall. For a diet marketed as heart healthy, that finding shocked many researchers immediately. The risk appeared even larger among people who already had heart disease. Participants with existing cardiovascular conditions saw their risk increase by over 60%. That subgroup finding raised particular concern for patients managing existing heart conditions. Doctors often recommend lifestyle changes to patients recovering from cardiac events specifically. If fasting worsens outcomes for that group, current advice may need reconsidering. Researchers also examined people living with cancer as a separate comparison group. Surprisingly, cancer patients who avoided restrictive eating windows had better survival outcomes. That contradicts general assumptions that restricting food always benefits chronically ill patients. It suggests the relationship between fasting and mortality is more complicated than assumed. Health researchers stressed this was a preliminary presentation, not a finished published study. The findings appeared as a conference abstract rather than a peer-reviewed paper. That distinction matters because abstracts receive less scrutiny before public release. Peer review typically catches errors and challenges assumptions before publication happens. Despite that caveat, the American Heart Association still promoted these findings publicly. Major news outlets quickly picked up the dramatic doubling of risk headline. That rapid spread created confusion among people already practicing intermittent fasting daily. Should millions of dieters immediately abandon a routine they had built their lives around? The lead researcher offered an important clarification that many headlines initially overlooked. She explained that an association does not automatically prove direct causation exists. In other words, fasting might not be the actual cause of these deaths. Something else entirely could explain why short eating windows correlate with mortality risk. This distinction between correlation and causation matters enormously in nutrition science research. Consider who typically adopts restrictive eating schedules in the first place naturally. Some people fast because doctors already told them to lose excess weight. Being overweight is itself a well-established risk factor for heart disease. It also shows why preliminary findings deserve careful framing before reaching the public. A conference presentation is simply not the same as settled medical consensus. Future research will likely refine, confirm, or even overturn these initial findings entirely. Larger studies with longer follow-up periods could clarify the fasting mortality question. Researchers may also identify which specific subgroups face the highest genuine risk. Until that clarity arrives, uncertainty remains the most honest scientific answer available. To understand why this matters, it helps to know how fasting affects the body. During a fasting window, insulin levels drop and stored fat becomes available for energy. Proponents argue this metabolic shift improves blood sugar control over extended periods. Some researchers also point to a cellular cleanup process called autophagy during fasting. Autophagy allows cells to break down and recycle damaged internal components efficiently. Animal studies have linked this process to improved longevity in laboratory settings. However, translating results from mice to humans rarely happens in a straightforward way. Human metabolism, lifestyle, and genetics differ enormously from controlled laboratory rodent populations. This gap between animal research and human outcomes fuels much of the current debate. Fasting advocates often cite these mechanisms as proof the practice must be beneficial. Skeptics counter that mechanisms alone do not guarantee real-world health improvements. A theory can sound biologically plausible while still failing in actual clinical trials. That is precisely why randomized trials remain the gold standard for nutrition science. Several smaller randomized trials have actually tested time-restricted eating directly already. One notable trial found modest weight loss, but no dramatic cardiovascular benefit. Another found time-restricted eating performed similarly to standard calorie restriction overall. Neither of these earlier trials reported the dramatic mortality risk seen here. That inconsistency raises questions about why this particular study found such a strong signal. Some researchers suspect unmeasured lifestyle factors are driving the association observed here. Others wonder whether something specific about the American population sample matters significantly. Diet, exercise habits, and healthcare access vary widely across different study populations. A finding in one country's population may not automatically apply everywhere else. This is another reason scientists urge caution before drawing sweeping global conclusions. Meanwhile, the fasting and wellness industry has grown into a massive global market. Books, apps, coaching programs, and supplements built entire businesses around fasting promises. Billions of dollars now flow through products marketed using fasting-related health claims. A study like this one threatens both consumer confidence and industry profits directly. Some companies quickly issued statements downplaying the study's relevance to their specific programs. Others stayed silent, apparently hoping the controversy would fade from public attention. This is not the first time popular nutrition advice has faced sudden reversal. Decades ago, dietary fat was widely blamed for causing heart disease broadly. Later research complicated that simple narrative considerably, especially around unsaturated fats specifically. Eggs and cholesterol faced a similar rise and fall in public health messaging. Guidelines once warned strongly against eggs before later research softened that stance. These historical reversals explain why many people distrust sudden new dietary warnings today. Nutrition science evolves slowly, but headlines demand instant, simple, dramatic answers regularly. That mismatch creates fertile ground for confusion, backlash, and public skepticism afterward. Medical organizations now face real pressure to communicate uncertainty more clearly up front. The American Heart Association defended releasing these preliminary results despite their limitations. Other people might skip meals due to demanding work schedules or poverty. Night shift workers and long-haul drivers often eat irregularly by necessity. Financial hardship can also force people into unintentional fasting patterns regularly. Any of these underlying factors could explain higher cardiovascular mortality risk independently. Researchers call these hidden influences confounding variables within observational study designs. Confounders make it extremely difficult to isolate one single cause from data. This is exactly why scientists distinguish between observational studies and controlled clinical trials. An observational study simply tracks what people already do naturally over time. A controlled trial randomly assigns different diets and monitors outcomes directly instead. Only controlled trials can truly prove that one factor causes another outcome. This fasting study was observational, meaning causation remains scientifically unproven for now. Still, the sheer size of the risk increase demands serious scientific attention. A 91% increase is not something researchers can casually dismiss. Cardiologists outside the original research team quickly began debating these results publicly. Some experts urged caution against making dramatic dietary changes based on one report. Others argued the findings justified funding larger, more rigorous follow-up research immediately. That disagreement itself reveals how unsettled this area of nutrition science remains. Meanwhile, other studies over the years have shown fasting benefits in different contexts. Some research links periodic fasting to improved blood sugar control and inflammation markers. Animal studies have even suggested fasting might extend lifespan under certain conditions. This creates a confusing picture for anyone trying to eat more healthfully. How can one dietary pattern show both dangerous and beneficial signals simultaneously? The answer may lie in how each study defines and measures fasting specifically. 16.8. Fasting differs significantly from longer fasts or occasional calorie restriction days. Duration, consistency, and individual health status likely all influence eventual health outcomes. A healthy young adult may respond very differently than someone with heart disease. Nutrition science rarely produces simple universal answers that apply to everyone equally. This complexity gets lost when headlines compress research into single dramatic statistics. Readers see a scary number without understanding the study's important limitations. That gap between nuanced science and viral headlines creates widespread public confusion. It also fuels distrust when future studies later contradict earlier dramatic claims. So what should someone currently practicing intermittent fasting actually take from this? Experts generally recommend discussing any major dietary pattern with a personal doctor. This becomes especially important for anyone managing existing heart or metabolic conditions. Blanket panic is not the appropriate response to one preliminary conference abstract. Neither is completely ignoring a signal this strong from a large dataset. The responsible path likely involves waiting for peer-reviewed, published research to emerge. Randomized controlled trials, specifically testing time-restricted eating, would clarify much more. Until then, this study functions as a caution flag rather than a verdict. It reminds researchers that popular diet trends deserve rigorous, ongoing scientific scrutiny. Wellness culture often adopts trends faster than science can properly evaluate them. Social media accelerates that gap between trendy advice and verified medical evidence. Millions adopted intermittent fasting based on promising early research and personal testimonials. Few paused to ask whether long-term cardiovascular outcomes had been fully studied. This story is ultimately about more than just one specific eating pattern. It highlights how quickly health trends can outpace the science supporting them. The original study population had an average age of roughly 49 years. Younger adults and older adults may metabolize restricted eating windows quite differently. Hormonal differences between men and women could also influence cardiovascular risk outcomes. Few existing studies have broken results down by these important demographic factors. That gap leaves many practical questions about who faces the greatest actual risk. Doctors treating diverse patient populations often lack clear guidance for specific groups. This uncertainty makes broad, one-size-fits-all dietary advice especially problematic here. Personalized medicine increasingly recognizes that identical diets affect different bodies unequally. Genetic testing and metabolic profiling may eventually help tailor fasting recommendations individually. Until such tools become widely available, general population statistics remain the best guide. That guide, however, comes with the significant limitations already discussed throughout this story. Journalists covering health stories face growing pressure to balance speed against accuracy. Breaking a story first often matters more commercially than getting every nuance right. That commercial pressure can worsen the gap between preliminary findings and settled science. Readers deserve context alongside dramatic statistics, not just the headline number alone. Responsible science journalism explains study design, limitations, and appropriate next steps clearly. Not every outlet meets that standard when a viral health story breaks quickly. This particular fasting story became a case study in that broader tension. Some outlets included careful caveats, while others ran with the scariest framing possible. That inconsistency shaped how differently readers around the world understood the same research. It also shows why checking multiple sources matters for any major health claim. Ultimately, this story is still being written as new research continues. For now, millions of people continue their daily eating windows largely unaware. Whether that habit is helping or quietly harming them remains genuinely unresolved. The number 91% will likely follow this diet for years to come. Whether it becomes a footnote or a turning point depends on future evidence. Science rarely moves as fast as headlines demand, and this story proves it. What began as a simple diet trend is now a genuine open question. Officials argued that even early warning signals deserve public attention and scrutiny. Critics countered that premature publicity can cause unnecessary fear before facts are settled. Both sides raise legitimate concerns about balancing transparency against scientific caution carefully. Public health communication always walks a difficult line between urgency and accuracy. Move too slowly, and people miss potentially important health warnings entirely. Move too quickly, and people panic over findings that later prove incorrect. This particular study sits uncomfortably in that difficult middle ground currently. For patients with existing heart conditions, doctors recommend a more cautious approach specifically. Anyone already fasting while managing heart disease should discuss it with their cardiologist. Sudden dietary changes without medical guidance can carry their own separate risks. Stopping a long-practiced habit abruptly is not automatically the safer choice either. Gradual, monitored adjustments generally work better than sudden dramatic lifestyle overhauls. For healthy individuals without heart disease, the picture remains far less clear. Population-level statistics do not necessarily predict what happens to any one person. Genetics, exercise habits, sleep quality, and stress levels all shape individual outcomes too. A single risk factor rarely tells the complete story of someone's health. This is why doctors generally recommend looking at overall lifestyle patterns together. Diet alone, whether restrictive or not, cannot fully explain cardiovascular disease risk. Exercise, smoking status, sleep, and genetics all interact in complex, overlapping ways. Reducing heart health down to one single number oversimplifies a complicated reality. Yet, oversimplified numbers are exactly what spread fastest across social media platforms. A 91% risk increase makes for a compelling, shareable headline instantly. Nuanced caveats about confounders rarely generate the same viral attention or engagement. This dynamic shapes how the public actually receives and remembers scientific findings. Researchers increasingly worry that headline-driven science communication distorts public understanding significantly. Some have called for stricter guidelines around publicizing unreviewed conference abstracts publicly. Others argue transparency should win out, even if early results later change. This debate extends far beyond fasting into how all nutrition science reaches the public. Every year, new studies challenge previous dietary assumptions in similarly dramatic fashion. Coffee, alcohol, red meat, and dairy have all faced conflicting research findings. That pattern leaves many people simply exhausted by ever-changing nutrition advice. Some researchers now argue for slower, more careful communication around preliminary findings. Others believe the public deserves immediate access to any potentially important signal. Where this particular debate lands may influence how future studies get reported. For now, larger and more rigorous studies are already being planned by researchers. Scientists hope randomized trials can finally clarify whether fasting truly causes harm. Until those results arrive, this story will likely remain unresolved and debated. Millions of people will keep fasting, unaware of this unanswered scientific question. Others will abandon the practice entirely, based on a single preliminary finding. Both reactions carry their own risks, given how incomplete current evidence remains. The safest approach probably involves informed caution rather than extreme reactions either way. Talk to a doctor, consider personal risk factors, and watch for new research. Nutrition science rarely offers permanent answers, only the best current available evidence. That evidence can shift significantly as new, better designed studies get published. This story is a reminder that dramatic headlines rarely capture full scientific nuance. Behind every viral statistic sits a more complicated, carefully qualified research reality. Consider also how age and sex might shape individual responses to fasting differently.